So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, Stoicism is essentially a philosophy that a lot of the great philosophers, some emperors, some rulers, a lot of business people today embodied over the last, centuries or whatnot, thousands of years of human history. When you guys hear about how a lot of people talking about some of the greatest nations today are on the decline or are close to falling, that happens a lot of times when nations become very Epicurean, very entangled and intertwined with luxuries and with minute details and with little things and with the lavishes of life and with the things that aren't stoic, with the things that aren't the fundamental principles of life. And they always talk about Rome falling and the great empire of Rome, which at one point was obviously, vast, and they had a ton of power. It was one of the greatest empires in history, right? They talk about Rome falling when Rome became extremely open and lavish, and it was all parties and other extracurricular activities that we won't discuss here. That's all that they were doing in Rome, and it became very materialistic and whatnot. It became Epicurean from the Stoic place that it was when the Roman warriors were conquering and taking over everything. And so that's basically Stoicism and Epicureanism, and they're both different schools of thought in their own, so you can actually study both. But Stoicism has become a lot more popular nowadays as well, with people like Ryan Holiday starting podcasts, writing books around the Daily Stoic and whatnot. But just to go back to the main point, the interesting thing here with Stoicism is they had a lot of very cool practices that we can even do today. So for example, one practice they did is called fear setting. So instead of goal setting, they would do fear setting. And one of the greatest Stoics, there's a lot. Epictetus, one of the philosophers, Seneca was a great one. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, was a very notable one. He also wrote Meditations, which is really excerpts from his actual journal. So you guys can get this book, Meditations. It's a short book, easy to go through. And this is the journal, the actual writings to himself of a Roman emperor at the height of that empire. And you guys can get a glimpse into that by reading this book of what he used to write to himself every night and every morning. It's pretty fascinating if you think about it. But one of the things that Marcus Aurelius talks about, and just in Stoicism in general, is they used to do this exercise called fear setting. And fear setting was basically every single morning, they would write out all the terrible and negative things that could potentially happen. And they would put it all on paper. So for example, Marcus Aurelius would write, today I'm going to meet with people that are, let's say, dumb-witted, or let's say hateful or vengeful. Today, somebody will try to backstab me. Today, I'll meet people that are looking to get an advantage over me. Today, I'll see people who are looking to ruin our empire. He would write these things down, essentially to look at the worst case scenario and then be okay with it, at least at his core. Realize that all of this will happen. That's out of his control. Then he would put the shift and the focus on what is actually within his control, and he would go towards that. And then that way you've handled the worst case scenarios by confronting them. And there are modern day entrepreneurs like Tim Ferriss being a very notable one that actually do this practice when they get anxiety. So this is technically a little treatment to anxiety. When they get anxious, when they get nervous, when they have things happen in their business that are out of control, when things spiral in their lives. I know Tim Ferriss does this actively. They sit down in their journals and they write, this could happen. My business could entirely fall apart. My family could do this. This could happen. My friends could do this. And they'll do fear setting exercises. So they'll put the worst case scenarios on paper. And one thing that's very fascinating is usually when you do that, I've actually done that myself with other areas of life too. It's not an active practice for me, but I've done it just to see what it's like. And the funny thing is, and this is something that Tim Ferriss used to say as well, when you actually do that, you'll realize all of the worst case scenarios really aren't that bad. They're not as bad as you think in your mind. But people get so analytical. It was actually one of the strategies we talked about in personal philosophies. We talked about thinking traps, right? And paralysis by analysis, overthinking, overanalyzing. And that's what happens when you're always in your head, you're in your mind. So a lot of times you take that and you put it down on paper. For this exact reason, I said something like, I have a to-do list. I don't keep anything in my brain. I empty my brain. I put everything on a to-do list. The moment I think of something I have to do, I'll put it on my list. I'll put it on my board. It was for the same reason as this. Things in your mind tend to pile up, tend to compound. But the moment you put it on paper and put it down, it's a really powerful practice.